On 2nd of July, 2023 at 2:22 p.m., a police officer forcefully grabbed a pregnant woman's arm in a public highway, unknowing to him that his own body camera was recording. By nightfall, he was in handcuffs. By morning, 11 women were finally ready to testify against him. This is the story of the stop that Timothy Frazier will spend 17 years regretting. After watching this video, you will never look at a routine traffic stop the same way again. Because what happened on Highway 9 that Tuesday afternoon wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. And the only reason it ended, the only reason those 11 women got justice, is because one day, Timothy Frazier picked the absolute wrong target. But the craziest part isn't the multiple confessions, it's what Timothy Frazier was doing when nobody was watching. More on that in a second. Before the story begins, take 1 second to support the channel. Our goal is 5,000 subscribers in the next 30 days, and every single person who subscribes and comments where they're watching from will get a shout out when we hit that milestone. So hit subscribe, drop your city or country in the comments, and you might see your name featured in our next videos. The lights came on without warning. No siren. No reason. Just the blue and red stutter of a Calhoun Parish cruiser filling the rearview mirror of a government-issue Bic Enclave doing 52 in a 55 zone on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. Cheryl J. Cooper saw the lights and did not panic. She checked her mirrors, clear. Checked her speedometer, legal. Checked the date on her mental calendar, 3 days of classified briefings in Baton Rouge, a joint interagency task force on domestic political violence, 12 hours of driving total, and now this. She signaled. She slowed. She pulled onto the gravel shoulder of Highway 9 with the precise, unhurried motion of a woman who had been trained to manage controlled descents into dangerous situations. One hand went to the wheel. The other rested on the curve of her stomach. 7 months. The baby shifted. In the side mirror, the officer stepped out. Broad. Unhurried. He walked toward her car the way men walk when they've decided the outcome before they've heard a single word. That particular swagger that isn't confidence so much as the long-acquired ease of a man who has never once been corrected. His right hand hung near his holster. Not touching it. Just reminding it he knew where it was. Cheryl powered her window down. Both hands returned to the wheel, fingers spread, each one visible. Not because she was nervous. Because she was professional. The officer reached her window and leaned in. His eyes moved across the interior, the leather seats, the federal lanyard hanging from the rearview mirror, her stomach, and his face did something she recognized. It wasn't aggression, not yet. It was the expression that precedes aggression. The expression that requires an audience of one and a target who doesn't know they've been chosen. She had seen it before. In case files. In courtrooms. In the mirror of her own memory, worn on other faces, on other roads, in other counties where the same invisible sign was posted at the county line. You people don't belong here. She waited. And somewhere beneath his cruiser's dashboard, a body camera was already recording. License and registration. No good afternoon. No do you know why I stopped you? Just the flat command of a man who had skipped the part where you treat a person like a person. Of course. Cheryl kept her voice even. Calibrated. I'll reach into the glove compartment. That all right? I'll tell you when it's all right. He crossed his arms against the door frame. Whose car is this? Mine. It's a government vehicle registered to the United States Secret Service. If you run the full plate. Secret Service. He made a sound, not a laugh, something uglier dressed up as one. His gaze moved over her again, slower this time. Taking inventory. You people, he said, and he said it the way men say it when they want you to know every syllable is intentional, don't belong on this road. Something moved through Cheryl's chest. Not fear. Something older and harder than fear. The particular weight of a sentence she had heard in different shapes her entire life. On playgrounds, in boardrooms, at security checkpoints before she was the security. She had carried it for 35 years. She had refused, every single time, to let it make her small. She wasn't just a driver. She was a woman trained to outscore every man in her cohort at the Secret Service. And she knew exactly what he was doing. Cheryl had been promoted 4 times, each before her peer group, each with the same line in her file, exceptional operational instinct under pressure. She had stood post at 2 inaugurations. She had run protective details in countries where the threat wasn't hypothetical. She had identified a credible danger to a sitting cabinet member that 2 other federal agencies had missed entirely. She had done all of that while being, to men like the one outside her window, simply a black woman in a nice car. "I am a federal employee on a public highway," she said. "I'd like to know the legal basis for this stop." "You crossed the center line." "I did not." "I say you did." He reached out and pulled her door open. No warning. No hesitation. Just the flat presumption of a man for whom other people's doors have always been his to open. "Step out." "Officer." Her voice dropped, not in volume but in register, gaining the particular quality her supervisors had spent a decade writing about in performance reviews. Command presence. "I am 30 weeks pregnant. I am also a credentialed special agent with the United States Secret Service." She lifted the gold shield from the console and held it toward him. "My identification is right here. I am asking you to look at it." He looked. He read the seal. He read the photo. He read the words United States Secret Service and the words Special Agent and her name and her badge number. He looked at all of it. And then he smiled. "Nice prop." He reached out and flicked the lanyard with one finger, one small, contemptuous flick that would later be freeze-framed in a federal evidence presentation and played for a jury 12 times. "Where'd you pick that up? I've seen better fakes." He unsnapped the retention strap on his holster. "Out of the car. Right now." What Cheryl knew, and what Timothy Frazier had no way of knowing, was that she had pressed a single recessed button on her smartwatch 42 seconds into the stop. The kind of press that looks like checking the time. The signal had already routed to the Secret Service field office in New Orleans. The GPS ping was already live at the DHS Rapid Response Unit in Baton Rouge. She had done it without looking down. She had done it because 9 years of training had collapsed the distance between waiting and preparing into a reflex she didn't have to think about anymore. Timothy didn't know the sky was about to fall on him. "If you think you know how this ends, you're wrong." Cheryl held her position. She kept her hands visible. And she let him keep talking. Because every word he said was being recorded. And Timothy L. Frazier, 16-year veteran of the Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department, had never once in his career been made to answer for a single one. That was about to change. In a bold voice Cheryl said, "I am not exiting this vehicle." Her voice was steady. Level. The voice of a woman who had talked down people holding weapons in 4 different time zones. "I am a federal law enforcement officer. Any physical contact constitutes assault on a federal agent. I am formally advising you." Frazier grabbed her arm. He grabbed the arm of a 7 months pregnant United States Secret Service special agent on a federal highway at 2:22 in the afternoon, with a fully functioning body camera on his chest recording at 60 frames per second. Cheryl braced against the door frame. Her right hip carried a SIG Sauer P229 under her blazer, and she did not reach for it. She did not strike back. She did not give him a single frame of footage he could use to build a different story. She held her position with the deliberate stillness of someone who understood that the most powerful thing she could do in this moment was survive it clean. "This is Special Agent Cheryl Cooper." She directed her voice toward the car's interior microphone, the one Frazier still hadn't noticed. "Badge 4471. I am being physically detained on Highway 9, Calhoun Parish. Requesting immediate response." The reply came through the car speakers in under 10 seconds. "Copy, Agent Cooper. GPS confirmed. Units are 4 minutes out. Air support is 2 minutes. You are not alone. Stay on the line." Frazier's grip released. He stepped back from the door. Something happened to his face that took a full 3 seconds to complete, arrogance draining out in stages, replaced by confusion, replaced by the first cold arrival of a thought he had never once in 16 years been required to have. What if I miscalculated? He looked at the car speakers. He looked at her watch. He looked at the cloudless Louisiana sky above Highway 9. And then, from somewhere beyond the tree line to the south, came a sound he felt in his chest before he heard it with his ears. The rhythmic, descending thrum of rotor blades. The helicopter came over the tree line at 80 feet and held there, a DHS Bell 407 with its spotlight cutting a hard white column through the October afternoon, the rotor wash pressing the roadside grass flat in wide, insistent circles, flattening the landscape the way authority flattens excuses. Timothy Frazier looked up into that light with his hand still resting near his holster. He was certain, in the way that men who have never been corrected are always certain, that this was a misunderstanding. That there was a version of this where he explained himself and walked away. Where the badge was a fake after all. Where the speaker voice was a recording, a trick, a bluff. He was wrong about all of it. The DHS expedition came around the bend at 2:26 p.m. 2 more followed. A Louisiana State Police cruiser pulled in behind them. 4 agents in tactical gear deployed before the first vehicle stopped fully, their boots hitting the gravel with the weight of people who had not driven 4 minutes to negotiate. Federal agents. Hands visible. Do not reach. The blood left Frazier's face in one clean wave. Supervisory Special Agent Dana Reeves stepped from the second vehicle and walked past Frazier as though he were furniture, stepped past him without eye contact, without hesitation, and went directly to the BIC. Cheryl had stepped out. She stood straight, one hand resting on her stomach, credentials displayed against her blazer. She looked exhausted. She looked composed. She looked like a woman who had just survived something she should never have been required to survive. He grabbed my arm, she said quietly to Reeves. Bodycam has every frame. But Dana, she glanced back at the cruiser, then at the patrol logs visible through the windshield. Check his stop history on this corridor. This didn't start today. Reeves followed her gaze. She pulled out her phone. What she pulled up in the next 4 to 5 seconds, 31 stops, 23 involving black women traveling alone, 14 with no documented justification, was not a surprise to the women who had driven this road before Cheryl. It was just the first time anyone with the power to act had bothered to look. The federal warrant arrived within 6 hours. What investigators found inside Timothy Frazier's patrol vehicle was a handwritten personal log, dated, detailed, systematic, that documented all his crimes. He didn't just log the stops. He graded them. Can you imagine the ego it takes to keep a diary of your own crimes? Inside his department locker, 3 confiscated driver's licenses. The women they belonged to had never received citations. Had never been arrested. Had simply been pulled over, shaken down, and sent home carrying something they couldn't name and didn't yet know they were allowed to report. But here is the detail that changed everything, the one that made the federal prosecutor's team sit back in their chairs and stare at the ceiling for a long moment before speaking. The Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department had received formal complaints about Frazier's conduct on Highway 9 on 4 separate occasions over the past 2 years. Each complaint had been logged, reviewed, and marked closed. The lieutenant who marked them closed was promoted 6 months after the last one. Frazier hadn't been operating rogue. He had been operating protected. Cheryl stood on the other side of that observation glass and looked at the women's faces as the investigator read the log entries back to them. She had one question she kept returning to, not about Frazier, but about the system that had watched him for 6 years and decided to see nothing. What would you have done? Comment below. And if you're not subscribed, the next part of this story is the part that cannot be unseen. 3 women came forward that first week. Then 5 more. Then, when word spread through the quiet network of women who had driven Highway 9 alone and arrived home shaken and silent, 3 others who had never told anyone, not their husbands, not their sisters, not a single soul, finally picked up the phone. 11 women in total. 11 separate encounters. 1 man. 1 corridor. 6 years. And a department that had, every single time, looked the other way. Her name was Sandra Okafor. 41 years old. Registered nurse. She had been stopped by Frazier on Highway 9 in March of the previous year, driving home from a night shift. He had told her the tag light on her rear plate was out. It wasn't. He had told her he'd need to search the vehicle. She had asked why. He had rested one hand on the roof of her car and leaned in close enough that she could smell the spearmint gum on his breath, and he had told her that how this went was entirely up to her. She had filed a complaint the following Monday. She had sat in the Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department and handed a written statement to the desk sergeant. She had watched him read it. She had watched his expression not change. He had told her someone would follow up. No one followed up. She filed a second complaint 8 months later, after she drove the same stretch of highway and saw Frazier's cruiser parked at mile marker 14, idling, pointed in the direction of oncoming traffic. She filed it at the same desk. She sat across from the same sergeant. That complaint was marked closed in 48 hours. When the federal investigator called Sandra Okafor's number, she answered on the first ring. She did not hesitate. She did not ask who else had come forward. She said, "I have been waiting for this call for 14 months. In the observation room, Cheryl Cooper listened to Sandra's testimony through the speaker and understood something she had spent 35 years approaching from the outside. The cruelty wasn't incidental. It wasn't a character flaw in one man on one road. It was a machine, calibrated, shielded, institutionally maintained, that had looked at women like Sandra and women like Cheryl and decided, department by department and complaint by complaint, that their word cost less than its own reputation. Frazier was a symptom. The department that buried 4 complaints was the disease. And now a federal grand jury had subpoenas for both. The federal courthouse in New Orleans was standing room only on the day of closing arguments. Sandra Okafor sat in the front row of the gallery. Brianna Walsh, 26, pharmacy technician, stopped by Frazier at dusk on a Wednesday with no documented reason, shaking too hard to drive herself home afterward, sat beside her. Monique Tate, 32, a school teacher who had spent 11 months believing the complaint she filed simply hadn't been important enough to pursue, sat at the end of the row. They did not hold signs. They did not make noise. They sat in a line and looked at the back of Timothy Frazier's head and did not look away. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Frazier was convicted on 6 federal counts. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Assault on a federal officer. 4 counts of civil rights violations. The verdict was read in a room so quiet you could hear the air conditioning cycle. His former lieutenant, the one who had marked 4 complaints closed and received a promotion, was charged separately with obstruction. The Calhoun Parish Sheriff's Department was placed under a federal consent decree mandating independent oversight, mandatory body camera review, and third-party audit of every complaint filed in the past 7 years. Every buried complaint. Reopened. Every closed case. Reviewed. Frazier stood for sentencing in an orange jumpsuit with the remnants of his posture, that practiced, weaponized swagger, completely gone. What remained was a pale, diminished man looking at the judge with the expression of someone who has just discovered, far too late, that the protections he relied upon had expiration dates. The judge gave him 17 years. When the gavel came down, the gallery exhaled as one body. But Cheryl Cooper was not in the courtroom when it happened. She was at home. 6 weeks postpartum, sitting in the chair by the window where the morning light came in soft and unhurried, nothing like the hard Louisiana afternoon that had started all of this. Her daughter was asleep against her chest, one tiny fist pressed to her own cheek, breathing in the slow, enormous way that newborns breathe, as though breathing itself is still a revelation. The text from Dana Reeves came at 11:04 a.m. 17 years. Cheryl read it twice. Set the phone face down on the armrest. Looked at the window. She thought about Highway 9. Not about Frazier, he had taken up enough of her interior space, but about the road itself. The flat, bleached stretch of it between mile markers 8 and 19 where the fields go pale gold in October and the sky sits low and the distance between a car and help is wide enough for a man like Frazier to believe he was invisible. She thought about every woman who had driven that road alone and pulled over when the lights came on and arrived home afterward carrying something they couldn't fully name and didn't fully report and never entirely put down. She thought about Sandra Okafor waiting 14 months for a call that almost never came. She thought about how close she had been, 7 months pregnant, one hand on the wheel, one hand on her stomach, to becoming one more entry in a log that would have been buried in a filing cabinet in a department that had perfected the art of seeing nothing. The baby shifted against her chest. Made the small, searching sound that meant she was starting to wake. Cheryl pressed one hand gently to her daughter's back, steady, present, the same way she had pressed her hands to the wheel that Tuesday afternoon, both visible, both open. She did not reach for the phone again. She stayed in the chair. In the light. And for the first time in weeks, she let herself be still. Some things you survive don't leave marks on the outside. Cheryl Cooper drove Highway 9 that Tuesday and came home. 11 other women are still learning what it means that someone finally listened. If this story stayed with you, you know what to do. Subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, did 17 years fit the crime, or did justice fall short? Drop your verdict below.